So just click for next?
Yeah, click on that. You can move it to that screen.
Wait, what?
So, first step in resin casting is you make a mold. Thank you, sir. These are silicone, right? Basically, you have a master. It looks like this, or your thrusters that look like this, and you pour your two-part silicones in here. There are so many different types of silicones.
Maybe like a hair
on
lower.
your purpose.
Yeah, it's good. You can still see the table.
That's a deeper discussion that we'll get into, but this is kind of an overview of what resin casting you can do with resin casting. So if you look at this, is one of G's molds. So you see this is a two-part mold, right? It's made in two parts. The first part, you cast it like this, and then what you do is you usually put like a little base like Legos, and on the bottom I'll use Play-Doh. That's what this is, Play-Doh. And you shove this into the Play-Doh and you pour the resin or pour the silicone on top and let it cure. Let it cure in one of these things. This is called a pressure pot. This will minimize your bubbles. The other way to do this is to vacuum this out. I have both. I like the pressure pot better. So when I turn this up, I will show you how that pressurizes them. I'll run two versions of the casting. Why?
So they can hear.
You guys could all hear
You're not
me, right?
yelling as much. And just click that onto your thing.
Okay, you guys can hear me better even if I yell louder.
Just clip it down.
Great. So anyways, as you interrupted me, I don't know where the hell I am at now. So you made the first part, right? After it cures, you take it out, and then you clean off the Play-Doh, which was what I used here. You put it back in your box, and you mold the second part. Now, the Vaseline up there is used so that this doesn't stick to itself, because this is very, very adhesive. So if you don't use Vaseline on top of this and you made your second mold, congratulations, you made a silicone brick. Now, couple other things I've done is clamshells. So it starts off as a two-part, but then I don't put the Vaseline all the way around this, so that when I do the second part of the silicone mold, it sticks on here like that. That's generally how I like to do some of these molds, is that way. Is basically do that. Same thing with this. And these are all just basically silicone molds. So let's go on. So again, Chinese, pirate the shit out of this. Because, I don't want to be paying like $10 for a pack of this when I could make tens and thousands of these. So the other thing you could do is some of you guys like adding LEDs to kits, right? So this kit actually came with a solid piece for the eyes. Yellow, it's a Goosan, right? But I wanted to light the eyes, so I made a mold of this. I casted it in clear resin, which is an identical part, and I can light it up, and I have a clear piece to do this with. And that's done with clear resin. So this stuff is not clear resin. What? Or, how many of you guys are familiar with AOZ and this kit? This is a P Bandai kit. And they gave you one booster shield. Now, I wanted to build this with 3 booster shields. So I took the original Bandai parts and I pirated the crap out of it. So I made a whole set. And that mold is actually here. Or those molds are actually here for that piece. So you can see the different shield pieces are here. Go ahead. So another thing you do is, how many of you guys scratch build stuff? So you scratch build a detail, you made one perfect one. Now you have to make like 20 more because you're doing these funnels, right? What you can do is you take that master, make a mold of it, and make tons of copies. And then like sell them to your friends. Hey, here's the detail kit that you can do for your friends. Go ahead. So that's what I did. I made one master. I made a bunch of copies. So that's kind of what I replaced, because the original Bandai Hainu had these like effect parts that plugged into that detail bit, which I did not like. I was never going to use those effect parts. So what I did was I made my own like kind of thruster detail for that. Go ahead. Or the other thing is you can make a custom goof head, which I took the Exceed. How many of you guys know what the Exceed Zaku heads are, right? I made a conversion kit based off of this. So I used the original goof custom and I converted it. You see how I made all these mods to it. And then this is what it looks like compared to the goof head or the Zaku head. And I made a bunch of, go ahead. I made a bunch of copies. You go ahead. Oops. I made a lot of copies. So I actually sell this kit. If you're interested in buying one of these kits, as I plug away, go to the shirt table and ask about one of these kits. It does require a Exceed head, because I'm not going to rip Bandai off completely. I'm only going to sort of rip them off. They don't actually have a goof scaleless head. Eventually they'll do, because they're doing a bunch of those little heads, and it's easy to convert this. So, but this is what this is the extreme level of what you can do with some of these resin casting. The other thing I did with resin casting is you could also make molds. So this is a part of a Suzabi, the Verka Suzabi, and this is the little thruster belts inside the shoulder armor. I wanted to light it up. Actually, this is 144. This is not the Verka. This is 144. So this is tiny. So this is the little thruster that goes in the shoulder, the little shoulder armor that flaps out. I embedded LEDs in here when I casted it, so that you don't have to modify the kit to get the lights in there. So I'm going to go ahead and do a demonstration of making some molds, or making some casts. So step one, gloves, right? Because this stuff is adhesive. It sticks to everything. Anyone need your prostate checked? I'm not a physician. That makes it even creepier. I'm kidding. So, this is a scale. This runs off of, when you're doing this is based off weight. Your mix ratios are weight based. So this looks like 50 to 50, component A to B. So 50% of this to 50% of this. So this is the hardener, this is the base. So any of you guys use epoxy glues or epoxy putties, same kind of stuff. So the work range, depending on what version, what kind of resin you get, can range from work time of like 3 minutes to 5 minutes to 15 minutes to several hours. I think this is a 5 minute because it gives me enough time to mess around with it and also throw it in a pressure pot so it cures better. So I'm going to go ahead and start pouring some resin out. Excuse me while I get some water. So how this works is I'm going to pour the first one in. So if you guys are curious, you guys can come up and take a look at what's going on here. But I'm just going to measure out to maybe about 10 grams or so. God, this stuff's thick. So about 11 grams. Can you rip me off some paper towel, please? Gene here, even though he's quiet, he does a lot of casting. That's why he's helping me as a silent brother up here. So I have 11.82 on the scale. What I can do now That didn't sound good. Serves me right for yelling at you guys earlier. Is I'm gonna tar this, so I know 11.82. I'm gonna try to get as close to 11.82 as possible. What are we making molds of? Let's make some thrusters, right? Thank you. So what I'm going to do two things. I'm going to mix one without the pressure pot and one with. So I want to get this to about 11. Oh, crap, over. Which doesn't matter too much. Excuse me.
So
I'm just mixing this.
I should mention, some resins are more forgiving than others. For instance, so Reynolds Advanced Materials carries a line of resins that's really meant for beginners. So they do lots of volume based measurements, and their stuff is engineered so as if you're a little bit off in your ratios, it'll still cure up pretty well. However, other companies like Silpack, they do all their stuff by weight, and if you mess up 1 or 2 grams in either direction, your stuff's not going to cure. So me personally, I do all my stuff by weight, but if you prefer doing your stuff by volume, that's kind of something you should take into consideration. But honestly, a weight-based measurement is always going to work better for you for better consistency. Go ahead.
I will sort of explain what I'm doing here, but because of time-based issues, I'm gonna kind of go ahead and just pour these out. So what I'm doing is I'm pouring the resin in here, and I'm kind of squeezing my mold. What's happening is as I squeeze the molds, the air bubbles, air pockets inside are kind of filling up. So now that I have that done, take this off, leave one out, and put one in my pot. So this is an exothermic reaction, meaning it gets hot to cure. It will get very hot. I'm going to just turn on my air compressor now.
So what's happening in this case is when you mix the resin, for instance, it introduces a lot of air into your resin mixture, which is where you get a lot of your casting bubbles, and also your mold, just how it's naturally made, will make little air pockets. So what happens is when you throw your mold into a pressure pot, it increases the air pressure inside your mold, and what happens is any little air bubbles get squeezed down to a microscopic level. So when you pull out your mold and your resin's cured, that bubble is pretty much squeezed down to a fraction of what it would have been if you didn't pressurize your system. So one of the things you have to make sure though is to not demold or depressurize your mold too quickly, because if your resin is still pliable, once you decompress, your air bubble is just going to expand again, and then you're going to get pimples in your mold.
So right now we're at 40 psi. What 40 pounds of pressure is equivalent to is about a little over 90 feet underwater. How many of you guys scuba dive? Nice. So as you go deeper, 1 atmosphere, 2 atmosphere, this is about 3 atmospheres underwater. That's that pressure pushing in on you. So all those bubbles will squeeze out or go to the surface, or at least resistance. You want that to happen because this will give you the cleanest cast. You want to do your molds like this because that will give you the cleanest molds as well. So right now, if you look at this, you guys can kind of touch this and feel that it's getting quite warm. to the touch. And you see that it's already gelled. So as this gels, this will get more and more a white color. So right now it's more this dark tone. It'll get more of a tan color as it cures. So this should fully cure maybe about 15 minutes, but within about 5-10 minutes, I can demold this and then show you what I've made as copies.
So one of the things you also want to watch out for is if you're going pretty far with like the resin casting and you want to use a pressure pot, you always want to pressurize both your mold and your resin. Because if, for instance, you don't pressurize your mold, you're going to have little tiny air pockets in your silicone mold. And if you take that mold and you throw it into a pressure pot and you pressurize your resin is going to basically go into those little surface air pockets, and your piece is going to look like it has measles. Like that's literally the closest analogy I get, because what's going on is, so if you don't do any kind of pressure work, imagine all of that against the surface of your piece, right? And when you pressurize, the resin is going to want to crawl into all of those little crevices. So if you don't pressurize, then don't do it in either step of the molding and casting process. That said, you can take a pressurized mold and pour a cast in it, and you don't have to pressurize that, but you still get air bubbles. But you should definitely pressurize both.
Come up and grab this, and you get touch and feel as it's curing. You see that it's warm, so go ahead and just kind of pass that around. You can see that it's slowly curing up. So it works as a nice adhesive as well. So this is kind of a bomb. I mean, it's pressurized stuff here, so you need to be careful when you're using a pressure pot like this. That's why my compressor will go up to 60 pounds, 60 psi. So that's another couple atmospheres. That's another like 2 atmospheres more. So what I want to do is I don't want to go that far. So I'm limiting myself to about 40 pounds. You can actually go with 20 pounds of pressure and be just fine. So depends on what you're used to working with.
So I'm going to go ahead and pass around these mold to cast, so you can kind of see the different stages of a finished product, from master to mold to printed resin copy. So Jacob.
So here's an example of another part that I mixed, and I use this mixture, and this is like the first cast I've done like a couple days ago. And you notice that it's very bendy. This is because this has gone bad, and I didn't fully shake this up. So you notice that it's very, very white. When I pull these parts out, you can see a kind of an off-white brown tan color to it. So you can feel that this is not fully cured, and it will never fully cure. So the reason why you don't want to use expired resin, or you want to make sure that you shake this up and heat this up, so that you get your money's worth, right? You're already pirating stuff. You're already trying to save money because you want to spend money on these metal thrusters. So notice how this is rubbery. So go ahead and pass that around. You can pass it around, let everyone feel. And if you break it, I really don't care. So where's that cup that's going around? Okay. So you notice that it's gotten a little bit more solid, right? So this is still slowly curing up. The longer I let it sit there, the harder this is going to get. So you do not want to rush this. You want this to be, kind of have some patience. It's cheaper than waiting for Amazon to ship these to you. So here's a clear piece you can pass around. So when you make thrusters, so what I did was I wanted to light the thrusters, so I made a clear cast because you know, these metal parts don't come in clear because they don't make clear metal yet. It'd be glass, transparent metal.
Transparent aluminum, very
yeah.
Star Trek.
So I make copies of this so I could kind of make it transparent like thruster.
So also one application of like molding and casting is if you're like me, I lose parts all the friggin' time. So it's actually nice because if you do your molds and your cast properly, you'll get an exact one-to-one copy. So even with like a Bandai kit, your parts will fit perfectly onto an existing part. So I'm going to pass around a little Exia arm, which I lost a bunch of parts to, and the little tan section is the part that I casted, and as you can see, it'll fit perfectly into an existing mold. Now also, resin is a little more pliable than styrene. Well, I guess it kind of depends on your resin. So I personally like to use resins for my V-fins because they have a little bit more give to them. And also, if I wanted to, I can throw a little like aluminum or brass or steel rod into the V-fin mold. So
they don't break.
Yeah. I've experienced that pain way too many times where I'm done with a kit and I'm like taking off the mask off of the V-fin and it just snaps on me. So that's not a great feeling. I'm sure y'all know.
Resin is also a lot softer than styrene plastic. So you're sanding, you're going to sand a softer material. And it's easy to go overboard when you're sanding resin. But you know, it's just like it's a plastic you get to work with, and it'll paint just like any other plastic. Go ahead, Jim. Do you guys have any questions while we're waiting for this to cure up? None? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
How important is using a pressure pot? How big of a difference does it make?
So his question is how big of a difference it makes when you're using a pressure pot versus not a pressure pot. That's why I have this part here, casting right now outside my pressure pot. And you'll see the difference once I demold this. So you can see that it's still kind of pliable. It's not fully cured yet.
So real quick, just to touch on that, then I'll get to your question. Now, because resin curing is an exothermic reaction, smaller pieces will take longer to cure than bigger pieces because it generates less heat. So, one of the things you really got to be careful with is when you're demolding smaller parts, you want to wait a lot longer to pull your parts because your parts are still going to be pliable if you wait too long, and you'll basically warp your piece, and that basically negates the whole process, essentially. So patience is key in all of this entire process. The thing that I find kind of difficult when working in this process is it's a lot of rush like a mad person and then wait. Because again, your resin can take as long as 2-3 minutes before it kicks, so you're rushing through all the time to get it poured, to get into your pot, and then you're waiting for like an hour and a half. So again, patience is a huge part of this process.
So as I peel back this clamshell mold, you can see that there's bubbles on the surface, right? I mean, granted, some of these, like this type of mold design is bad because I don't have an escape hole. So I have an example in here where I actually have an escape hole for some of the gases to get out, some of the bubbles to get out. But right now, even if I put this in a pressure pot, if I don't squeeze my molds correctly, this is trapped right here. I will not get that gas out. It's not gonna like kind of open this up and push that gas out. So at the top of the surfaces, I will still get bubbles. So this goes back to mold design and how you design your molds. So, if you go back to a couple of molds right here, you see that all these don't actually have escape holes for that. That's really bad mold design. Go back one more. Keep going back. Keep going back. Some of these actually have escape holes where when I do that mold, I'll glue a wood skewer to this edge so that when I'm casting or when I'm making that mold, I have an automatic hole. Or the other way to do is take a drill, take an X-Acto knife, and cut a hole, and try to match up the hole to where your part is. Then you have your gassing mold. So this is still kind of rubbery, but I could demold this, right? How much time has passed?
It's about 10 minutes, sounds like. Okay, sorry, so you had a question.
How big was the mold?
How big was your mold for the goof head?
No, like what? Go back to the now, how big was the mold?
So this is molded in separate parts. Go back one. These are all the different molds for the different parts of that goof head.
I thought you were like made it all into like.
No. I made it like it's a kit where you can have separate pieces and put it together.
So one of the things, now that we're on the subject of mold design, is that you always want to give as much clearance around your part as possible. So if you look at this, the thruster part here, while yes, it will take more silicone if you give more buffer, which means your mold's going to be a little bit more expensive, your mold is also going to be sturdier, so you're going to get less warping on your piece. So there's really a lot of considerations that have to be made when you're designing a mold, because at the end of the day, the more you think through your mold, the better you design it, the less cleanup you have afterwards. So for example here, you've got an open face mold, and you've also got like all this flashing in the back, right? So one of the things one could do if you didn't want to go through the trouble of like sanding this flash off is you would make a top half to this mold with the flat back, but you see where my arrow is, you can make little escape holes here and a pour spout here, so by the end of your whole process, you've only got 3 tiny nubs to clear off as opposed to a flat back. So I don't want to say that it's a very simple process, but it's as work on one end is going to save you work on the back end as far as this process is concerned.
And if you're just starting out with this, there's a bit of a learning curve, but this is just kind of a primer for what is entailed to get to that, get that mold process and resin casting process done. So right now, I'm just degassing the pot. So you can see the pressure is going back down to 0. So now that this is, degassed, I can undo this. I find that pressure casting also helps cure it faster.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It's also one of the things you want to worry, or not really worry about, but think about when you're molding and casting is moisture. Moisture is the absolute worst enemy of the resin casting process, because what you're going to get is if you get any kind of moisture in your resin, you're getting lots of like, you basically end up with like this really weird honeycomb effect in your piece, and everything just kind of warps. Even if you like throw it into a pressure pot, you'll get like a really weird foamy effect. So it's best to do this in not particularly humid environment, or also like do this indoors.
This is why Southern California is perfect for resin casting.
Yeah, and also like this matters like when you're storing your resins, right, and storing your silicones. Make sure it's in a cool, dry place. And if you have like little bags of desiccants, that also helps.
So if you guys want to pass this around, this is what got casted here, and this is what one of those metal Zaku spikes is. So what I did was I made a perfect copy of one of those. So you go ahead and pass that around, and it's still curing, so don't put fingernails into it, but it's still pretty solid. And in that time that we were talking, I've already made a copy of this, Zaku shoulder.
Oh, so one thing as far as like the availability of resins, there's lots of online companies out there that will sell really good casting resins. There's Alumilite, Silpack, and Reynolds Advanced Materials. They have a branch over in Burbank, and I think they also have one in like Long Beach. But I always go to the Burbank one.
Silpack's actually down the street from there. Silpack is in Pomona.
Yeah, right off of Bonita and Gary. So they're my personal favorite casting shop. Mostly because, like, again, they're right down the street. But whatever you do, never ever buy the stuff from Michael's. It is absolutely awful. Like that clear resin that they sell, don't do it.
So I was a little too overzealous with this. So it's still, again, part of the problem is this resin's old. But you can see that I have a bubble that's trapped there. But for the most part, this is perfectly fine. If you pass this around, there's a little bit of a bubble that got trapped, and like, oh, sorry about that. And this, again, if you're buying brand new resin, you won't have this problem if you're mixing correctly. Also, my mix ratio was off slightly, so that could be a contributing factor. Again, this is a bit of a learning curve, but it's not difficult to do. Yes, I can make an announcement. What do you want, sir?
We need to find Greg Trippy.
Huh?
Greg Trippy.
Greg Trippy. Is there a Greg Trippy here? Greg?
Right.
Greg? Okay, he raised his hand. Thank you, sir. Okay, we're gonna have a judge meeting. So, any of you guys that signed up for guest judging, or any of you guys are interested in helping out with the judging, we will pair you up with a head judge. We want to judge in threes, and we'll probably just give you one category, and you can learn the judging process and help out judging kids. Please, you're not allowed to judge the category you're entered in. So if you enter it in all 16 categories, you're not going to be allowed to be a judge. So this is, yeah, go ahead.
So, a question that I get asked a lot with these molds is how long does a mold last? Typically, if you take care of your mold, you use a mold release, and you're not like wrenching on your mold, a good mold will last about 30 pulls. So something to take into consideration with your projects. If you need something that you need to make a ton of, like a Zaku power cable or something, and you don't want to do that 30 times, resin molding and casting will work for you in that respect. So again, about 30 pulls. But if you run hot with your silicone, which means that you put a lot of hardener in your silicone to like help it cure faster, that does decrease your mold life.
That's why for my Zaku conversion kit to the Goof custom head, there's 3 of them. Because the molds start to deteriorate significantly after about 30. You start ripping undercuts and details that are in the mold, so your casts are going to get worse and worse as the cast goes.
So this is especially true of larger molds because heat will degrade the silicone faster. So the bigger your mold is, especially with something as big as like the Goof mold over here, then that's just going to degrade a lot faster than say some of these tiny molds. And also I find that clear resins tend to degrade molds faster as well. So again, something else to take into consideration.
And notice that when I'm passing these parts around, it's delicate, but as you let it sit, it should firm up. So when you make that comparison to that color that I passed around to this part that I passed around, you notice that this is a lot lighter in color. And it's the same mixture I did with this, but I didn't prep this so that this is still rubbery. So for all intents and purposes, if I leave that sitting out for a day, 2 days, it should completely harden up and it would not be like pliable like this. You know, I did this a couple days ago and it's still pliable. So if you try this with this part in a couple of days, you'll snap it right off. because it's become rigid and it's fully cured. You guys have any other questions about this?
Is there any cleanup process afterwards? Like I hear people use mold release and stuff to help remove the cast.
So,
Do you ever use mold release?
in my case, can I pass you the mold, the big mold? So sometimes it's really not possible to get mold release into every nook and cranny with like a tiny, like a tiny mold like these. But I like to do these big 2-part molds like this up here, just so I can spray a mold release on this. So a mold release is going to act as a nice barrier between your resin and your silicone, and that's a good way to maximize your mold life. So you can either use like a spray mold release, or you can use like baby powder or talcum powder as well, and if you don't want to go with like an aerosol spray. So the nice thing about like talcum powder, for instance, is that it actually helps the paintability of your finished surface afterwards, but if you're going to sand it, it really doesn't matter. But there are also lots of like little additives and things that you can throw into your resin to increase your mold life. But in general, if your mold allows for it, a mold release is a good thing to use. But it does leave a sort of like an oily film on your piece. So if you're going to use a mold release, especially like with aftermarket garage kits and stuff like that, they all use mold release. So it's really important to wash your parts in soap and water or something like Simple Green or Purple Power to get that mold release off, because that's going to inhibit paint adhesion down the line.
Along that line, Silpack recommended a mold release that's paintable.
Really?
Yeah, I have some at home. You can try it out
yeah.
next time. Just spray it on yourself. And
Airbrush myself.
So, again, as technology, this technology has been old, right? Hollywood uses this a lot. They make these a lot. So this technology is old and it's been pretty standardized. But as chemists get better with stuff, we do get better stuff like paintable mold releases and whatnot. So that's something you could kind of look into if you're serious about getting this, or if you're just starting out. It might help you out. But what the mold release does is it puts a layer on your parts and it keeps the molds fresh. And it keeps the part from sticking to the molds well. What ends up happening is paint will never stick to that because it's designed to keep stuff off of it. So if you're using like a Purple Power or Simple Green, soak your kits overnight, and that will dissolve the mold release and paint the part, and it should be good. If paint keeps flaking off, you haven't cleaned the part well enough, and there's still mold release on the parts.
So how long do your molds usually take to cure, your silicone?
My silicone usually takes overnight. So I like to let it sit, supposedly depending on, so when you're buying silicone, there's so many options. Your shore, which is basically how pliable it is. The type of silicone it is. There's tin, there's RTV.
Platinum.
Huh?
Tin and platinum are the
Yeah,
two
platinum.
most common types of casting silicone. You can use RTV as well, like stuff from Home Depot, but my success personally has been pretty limited with that, in that it's very thick, and especially if you're trying to use like a pressure pot or something, it's going to cause a couple of problems for you. But in a pinch, like a Home Depot RTV mold will get the job done.
The other thing I want to tell you about some of these molds, if you have a mold that you built wrong, or you're not going to use it any longer, what you can do is you can cut this up and use it as filler when you're making a new silicone. Now, you might run into issues with bubbles sticking to that, but if you're making like a simple one piece but not many undercuts, you can use this as a filler for some of your bigger molds.
Now, something to worry about with that process is make sure you're using the exact same silicone. So like, don't use like a Silpack product silicone and then try to use that as a filler in something from like Reynolds Advanced Mechanics. I mean, I know it's kind of like you think it's common sense, but it actually happens a lot. People think silicone is silicone. Not true. So you want to use the exact same ones when you're using old silicone bits as filler. So in my case, like if I'm doing a big mold, right, and like old molds that cure up, then for big pieces like this, notice there's lots of like space around here, so you can put bigger chunks of your mold in to fill space. But if possible, it's good if your old silicone doesn't actually touch the part. If that makes sense.
So another company that I picked up resin and silicone from is Hobby Silicone out in like Westminster area, almost like Huntington Beach. So they're right off of like I want to say Bolsa Chica. It's another resin shop run by a New Zealander, right? A Kiwi. So he's a pretty good guy, and he does a lot of. My office is sometimes down in Santa Ana, so I'll go to his shop to pick up stuff. But if I'm local to my house, then I come up to Silpack. So again, different products, different makers. Try not to mix the different silicones and resins.
Yeah, though I will say, just as a plug, I'm not being paid to say this or anything. I really like Silpack's silicones, but their clear resins are not the best. So Reynolds Advanced Materials does a really cool resin that's very forgiving as far as like their paint ratio. So like this like clear piece here was done in their crystal clear resin. And the thing about clear resins is you want to make sure that it's UV stable. So ask the person selling to you or the company if it's a UV stable resin, because clear resins that aren't UV stable will yellow over time. So if I did this particular piece in a non-stable resin, this will go green in like 5 years. And I think I've had this piece for like 4 years now, and there's still no degradation in the color. And I've like had this in direct sunlight. So
You shouldn't be putting your kids in direct sunlight anyways.
Perfect. Maybe you can answer it.
Just real quick, if anyone's a guest judge, we're having a judge meeting right now going on the registration tables. So if anyone's a guest judge in the crowd, just go outside to the registration. You'll see the group of people there, and that's going to be the pre-meeting for judging.
Edwin, that means you, outside. Don't let me know your name. You'll be screwed for life. Alright, and that's going to be it for this. So thank you for checking this out, and hopefully you guys picked up a couple of things for progressing your model building skills. Woo! Want to turn this off?
It's on the switch on the.
Off.
Thank you.
Thanks, Freddie. Yeah, sure.
Why do you use a pressure box instead of a vacuum?
Because my vacuum pump sucks, so
Let me just.
It's supposed to
but then
recording
it's expanding stuff. So, but I've used both, and I'm not proficient.